4x4, four-wheel drive, all-wheel drive. They all mean that all four wheels are under power. But what's the difference? Well, I'm here to tell you. And yeah, I know all you original watchers are already telling us we already did this video, but let's be honest, we can do a little bit better. And I'm Brad Danger, and this is Ideal. And if you haven't watched our other video on drivetrains, you might want to do that first. I will link down in the description because, well, it introduces a lot of concepts that we'll dig a bit deeper into on this vid. Otherwise, buckle up, let's go. And where better to start than just, hey, what the heck are these words that I'm using? Well, we'll start with 101, 4x4. That means four wheels, and each of the four wheels receives power from the engine. Four-wheel drive, on the other hand, well, it means exactly the same thing. It's just the shortened version of four wheels, four-wheel drive. And while there may be some subtle marketing differences, for the purpose of this vid, we are going to be using 4x4 and four-wheel drive interchangeably. And as a note, 4x4 is kind of the universal labeling scheme. You can have a 4x2, which is like your front-wheel drive Civic, or you can have a 6x6, which has six wheels and is six-wheel drive, like Stradman's Jeep. Heck, there's even weird stuff like a 6x2 for six wheels, two-wheel drive, like this Covini C6W. All-wheel drive, on the other hand, means that all wheels get power. Pretty simple, and on paper, that sounds like a 6x6 or four-wheel drive car would be, you know, all-wheel drive since all wheels are driven. But we wouldn't even need this video if it was the same, and we'll explain in just a minute. And guys, real quick, right now we are offering the best deal ever for the ideal car strategies. So if you want to learn how to make money buying the right all-wheel drive, four-wheel drive, or even two-wheel drive ideal car, the best time to join is right now. Other enthusiasts just like you and me have already invested in themselves and learned the proper way to research, finance, purchase, and ultimately exit for a premium. Plus, you get access to the best private Facebook group where you can learn from other enthusiasts just like you and me. And this is the blueprint I used, the step-by-step process to go from a cheap BMW to my ideal supercar and do it way quicker than I ever thought. And guess what? You can too. So click the link down in the description or the first comment to take advantage of this limited time offer and invest in yourself. Can't wait to meet you in the private Facebook group and say hey. And now, back to all-wheel drive versus four-wheel drive, baby. Because right now we need to talk about differentials. And a differential is a device that has one input and two outputs. It allows the two outputs to spin at a different speed than the input. On the rear-wheel drive cars, it goes engine, transmission, drive shaft, differential, axles, wheels. On an average front-wheel drive car, you got the differential and transmission are now one thing. A transfer case transfers power from one drive shaft to another. So you have the transmission putting out power to the rear drive shaft. And you want to spin the front wheels too, you transfer the power from the rear to the front. And then you spin all four wheels. Most all-wheel drive cars don't have a transfer case. More on that in just a sec. High gear and low gear are gear ratios for the final drive. High gear is a taller gear and can go faster, but you get less torque. Low gear is, well, lower and transfers more torque while sacrificing speed. A granny gear is just a really, really low gear. These gears or ranges are usually things you select on the transfer case. So you don't get these options on most all-wheel drive cars, only 4x4s. Locking hubs are another thing that are pretty much only found on 4x4s. In the olden days, you actually had to get out of your vehicle and manually lock the hub to the axles so that the front wheels could spin. Nowadays, most vehicles have automatic hubs and engage as soon as the transfer case does. Okay, four more terms. You can do it. Symmetrical all-wheel drive is a Subaru thing and also kind of an Audi thing, but Audi calls it Quattro. The big difference between Audi, Subaru, and a few others, and I want you guys to say this with me, a longitudinally, yes, a hard word to say 5 times fast, and a longitudinally mounted engine is where you have the engine in line with the car. So if you stand in front of it, all the cylinders are in a line, going through the longitudinal axis or center of the car. Traditionally, They're only found in 4x4s, rear-wheel drive, and Subaru vehicles. Transverse engine is when the cylinders line up between the front wheels, perpendicular to the center axis of the car. Most all-wheel drive cars have a transverse engine because they are front-wheel drive cars with the drive shaft tacked on to spin the rear wheels. Got it? I know. I hated index terms at school too. And we'll be talking about everything again. But it's so important at least to have a baseline when learning. Unfortunately, car companies don't believe in that. Part of the reason that car terms can be so darn confusing is that marketing departments don't give a damn about what words actually mean. Just like how BMW has a 4-door coupe, some companies will actually label their all-wheel drive car as a 4-wheel drive, and vice versa. 4-wheel drive Toyota Tercel, for instance, has a transfer case and was a real 4x4. The Honda Civic 4-wheel drive, though, was actually full-time all-wheel drive despite saying 4-wheel drive on the side. Then there's things like Volkswagen that built vans like the Van Again all-wheel drive that had 3 separate differentials that you could engage. Meaning, even though it didn't have a transfer case, it worked just like a modern 4x4, which I wanted to tell you so that it could put your mind at ease. If you see an old Audi Quattro and you refer to it as a 4-wheel drive vehicle, you aren't actually wrong. We, as car enthusiasts and people who like to be really accurate about the way that we describe cars, have decided that all-wheel drive and 4-wheel drive are different, that they describe 2 different things. According to the people that actually make the cars though, they usually just invent their own way to describe the specific technology that they use. VW has its quantum synchro system. Audi has the Quattro. Honda has real-time all-wheel drive, and Subaru owns the symmetrical all-wheel drive trademark. They all work differently, and they don't give a damn about how the car community groups them together. But that doesn't mean that the way that we group them isn't useful. After all, if you're curious about the difference between 4-wheel drive and all-wheel drive, it's probably because you want to own one or the other. And chances are, one category will work way better for you than the other. Such is life. So, finally, let's talk about what makes them different. Starting back when the very first cars were built, manufacturers found that having 4-wheel drive was better for grip, especially against 2-wheel drive. I don't even think that they had to figure it out, but it's just a duh thing. In World War II, the Jeep was king because it could go anywhere with its 4x4 system. And even today, we still use a really similar design. There's kind of this running joke that Jeeps haven't changed in 100 years.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
And the only part that's a joke is that, well, the 100 years, it's actually only been about 80 years. The problem with 4-wheel drive is that while it's great for grip on bad surfaces, when you have grip, like on a dry road, it's really bad. And that's because when you turn, every wheel is traveling at a different speed, but the 4x4 system wants to spin them at exactly the same speed. Differentials can help, but because the power is traveling through the transfer case to the front, there's no way for the front and rear to spin at different speeds. The solution, and what is perhaps the biggest difference between 4-wheel drive and all-wheel drive, is that you can simply disengage the front wheels from power. You just go to your transfer case and switch it from 4-wheel drive to 2-wheel drive. Older vehicles have a lever where you can physically move the gears out of the way, like a tiny manual transmission, but most modern vehicles just use an electrical switch inside and a remote actuator moves the shafts. Regardless, with the front wheels disengaged, you now have a rear-wheel drive vehicle that can handle corners with ease. Really, the number one reason that 4-wheel drive is still prevalent is because you get the option having 4-wheel or 2-wheel drive. And when the 4-wheel drive is engaged, it offers the most traction that you can get from any system. Between the more direct transfer of torque and the fact that the wheels can be locked together, in terms of off-road capability, all-wheel drive is not even close to 4-wheel drive. Sprinkle in a granny low, some locking differentials, and a good 4-wheel drive is completely unstoppable. On the top of that, since everything is separate and dedicated, it can be way overbuilt, meaning most 4-wheel drive systems are way stronger than their all-wheel drive counterparts. Since you have 2 drive shafts going to 2 differentials powering 2 axles each, all those parts can be beefy as hell and you won't run into any clearance or packaging problems. That also means you can add lift kits easily since you're just moving separate components around, and that is pretty ideal. And since all the parts are mechanical, save for some electric or pneumatic actuators, it's much easier to service and maintain the system. However, there are some drawbacks because, well, of course there are. First, even though they're easier to service, four-wheel drive systems tend to be more complicated and a lot harder to fit onto a vehicle. And that's a big reason why four-wheel drive is the domain of trucks and large SUVs. You need room for the transfer case and extra drive shafts, and usually a car just doesn't have the room. And that also adds a lot of weight. A really popular axle for off-roading, the Dana 44, weighs 400 pounds, which is like almost as much as me. And you need not one, but two of them. And then 3 drive shafts, a transfer case, and a beefier transmission just to turn the wheels on your Jeep, which starts to weigh more than an entire Civic. And it's not exactly an economic option if you care about performance and gas mileage. Finally, since four-wheel drive is selectable, you will sometimes have to make a really hard choice when driving around. If the road is just a wee bit frosty, do you want to ruin your tires and gas mileage by leaving it in 4 high? Or do you want to slip around a bit when accelerating? And that actually leads nicely into discussing all-wheel drive, because you don't have to choose. One of the features of all-wheel drive is that it's all of the time. See, without a transfer case, all-wheel drive cars don't have the option to just disconnect power to 2 of the wheels, but that makes them a lot more compact. The way it works with most all-wheel drive cars is that you start with a front-wheel drive car, so the engine is up front, mounted transversely, and the transmission has 2 outputs, one going to the front wheel and one going to the other. To add rear wheel drive to the mix, you just add another drive shaft that goes to the back that gives you 2 separate differentials. And that means that in a corner, all the wheels can be spinning at different speeds. It also means that you don't have as much beef and you can use really lightweight components. There's not a bunch of heavy gears and hubs to move around. And in fact, on most crossovers that use all-wheel drive systems, there straight up isn't space for any extra strength. And that's the main thing. Four-wheel drive has a transfer case and you can select different gears, but it's way heavier because of that. All-wheel drive does not, and it's more compact. Now, stop. I'm talking to you, commenter that's about to start talking about how not all-wheel drive systems work like that. I'm just gonna refer you to the start of the video. Yes, Subaru and Audi do things a little bit differently, and yes, there are small cars that have transfer cases and large trucks that don't. And yes, there are strange hybrid differential-based systems. Bob Ross would say, we are painting with a broad brush here, with happy little trees. And the biggest advantage of all-wheel drive cars is that you still get 2 times the grip compared to two-wheel drive, but you aren't sacrificing everything for it. See, since it's a more lightweight system and doesn't have extra parts causing parasitic loss, you don't need extra power to get the same performance. And where that really shines is in rally or on loose surfaces. You don't need the extra torque and strength to pull your car up a hill or a gravel road. You just need to make sure you have power going to all the wheels. And while, yes, an all-wheel drive car is heavier than a 2-wheel drive car, and they do corner a bit worse, but in racing, yes, we're talking about racing, that ability to accelerate hard out of a corner is an absolute mind-numbing game changer. In fact, it is such an advantage, even when the track is prepped and beautiful, like in the case of Le Mans, the cars are all switching to all-wheel drive. Both LMP1 and LMP2 have almost completely converted to all-wheel drive because the minor sacrifice in cornering is made up in the sheer acceleration potential. The other advantage of all-wheel drive is that with computers and advanced sensor technology, your modern all-wheel drive car can add power whenever it's needed. Meaning, you can get cars like the crowd favorite GTR that can throw power to the rear wheels to accelerate where it's more efficient, and then throw power to the outside wheels in a corner to help accelerate through the apex. And that is badass, and why I think it's the iPhone of cars. Now, the downside is that the same power vectoring is terrible off-road, as well as a few other things. First, an all-wheel drive car is just more expensive because all your wheels are powered. The tires wear down faster, and they all have to be replaced at the same time, which just costs money. And it's got a bunch of differentials that need servicing. That just costs money. And it's more complex, meaning the car will cost more if you go for the all-wheel drive option. And it's gonna burn more gas because it has to be be able to move all those extra parts around, which again just costs more money. Second, for your average driver that's just going around town, all-wheel drive is like the worst of both worlds. You don't have the unstoppable off-road power of a 4x4, and you also don't have the low-speed handling of a two-wheel drive. You just get a car that has horrible understeer and eats tires. So, million-dollar question, which one is for you? If you need to climb or drive through mud or need a lot of extra strength, you need four-wheel drive. However, if you live where it snows, but do most of your driving on the road, you just need all-wheel drive. You also want all-wheel drive if you want a performance car or just are interested in going fast. Is that clear? Because, well, there's one last major wrench to throw into the works. It's the same one that's ruining, like, everything. Electric. Yes, the E word. Are you tired like me of electric vehicles kind of ruining convention? Yeah. Check out our Save the Pistons t-shirt and help us save the Pistons. And also show some solidarity with your fellow enthusiasts. But how are they ruining the all-wheel drive versus four-wheel drive debate? Because when every wheel has its own motor, you are basically getting all of the advantages of everything. You can turn off the front motors and then you have rear-wheel drive. Or you can turn off the rear motors and get front wheel drive. Or you can run it in like an all-wheel drive where computers send power wherever it's needed. Or you could send equal power to every motor and it's the same as 4x4. And it's the same weight no matter what. And you get all the torque no matter what since there's no parasitic loss. Plus, look at this thing do the crab crawl. That means in 15 years, there will be no functional difference between all of these terms, and the off-roaders of the future will have truly unstoppable vehicles, whether it's a truck like the Rivian or a super cute Alpha Motors Jax. Let me know down in the comments below if you're sad to see the world change, or if you're excited for the possibility. I'm definitely sad that the sound and feel of the V8, it's going away for good. But I got to admit, if batteries do get better, sick electric unstoppable off-road van sounds pretty ideal. Anyway, this was a long vid. Thanks for watching till now. It means a whole lot to us. I'm Brad Danger. This is Ideal Cars. Subscribe, turn on that notification bell, hit the like button for the YouTube algorithm. Promise me one thing. No matter what car you're driving, keep living the ideal lifestyle.